Hello, everybody, and welcome back to UXChange, the podcast where I exchange my user experiences to change them, and yours for the better. I'm Jeremy, a mentor and senior user researcher with over 8 years of experience and a background in neuroscience. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of engaging with hundreds of users around the world, spanning across Europe, the USA, Africa, and India. This has allowed me to deliver actionable insights that have improved user experiences with nutrition, automotive, delivery, and e-commerce sectors. I've created this podcast with the aim of providing my mentorship and educational content, offering actionable tips, knowledge, and guidance in the realm of research, specifically focusing on UX research to anyone having an interest in this area. And I hope that you will find this episode insightful. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to UXChange for this second episode of this 3-episode series dedicated to mental models. If you haven't done it yet, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to the first episode where I discuss my perspective on mental models, why you should make a mental model map when you're designing for a new product, about also the theories around mental model mapping, why is this so important to understand what mental model is, the fact that they are they are kind of the skeleton of the design of any app, product, or even service, and then some characteristics about mental models, that they are subjective, individualized, they are based on beliefs, and they are not representative of the truth about our product, and they can evolve through time. And also I discussed about what is for me an important matter, which is that mental models are always evolving, and they are evolving because they depend on experiences, and these experiences are also shaped by new interaction paradigms and patterns. And so that's the reason why, if you want to do incremental innovation, you should quote unquote conform to your users' mental models to make sure you're not creating a mismatch that would lead the user to reject your product. But if you want to do disruptive innovation, you have to reinvent the way you solve your users' problems. You have to reinvent this process compared to the competition. And that sometimes leads to the shaping of new mental models in the head of your users, let's say. And so this can go wrong, but it can also go right. And you can imagine all ranges of, let's say, success and failure in between. So that is what I tried to communicate in the past episode. I hope that was clear. And the idea that is associated to that is, in terms of design, when you do incremental innovation, you would conform to your users' mental models. And so in this case, you would first identify your users' mental models with the techniques that we would talk about right now and in the next episode, and then you would design accordingly, according to the mental models you have identified. But then if you do some radical innovation or disruptive innovation in this case, you would probably try to educate them so that they can learn better the technology. And so this may require the use of additional tutorials or explanation or signifiers to help your users understand how this new paradigm works. And so that was in the previous episode. I hope you liked it. I really like talking about information architecture and mental models. Having a neuroscience background is really, really impressive sometimes to still discover things about users. That's why user research is so interesting to me, because we can use some methodologies that would allow us to really dive deep into the mental models in this case of our users. So the way they categorize information, the way they rationalize their actions and behaviors, the way that sometimes some actions and behaviors are completely opposite to what they think they are doing, or the way they declare things but then they act otherwise. And so that's why it's also really important to triangulate. And so that's why mental modeling is of much importance to me. I really like to do mental models. I really like to talk about information architecture. And also because this is a topic that is oftentimes overlooked. Let's be honest. Sometimes to make some innovation, some product or some architecture on a website or an app, companies, for a variety of reasons, sometimes they don't have the resources, and it's fair, but sometimes they could do some user research, quick and not necessarily dirty, let's say, so guerrilla research, and they would overlook the need to explore mental models first before designing an information architecture, because they think, oh, okay, competitor is doing this, so we should do this. And it's not entirely wrong, to be honest. That is part of the data you should gather when you want to define a taxonomy and define an information architecture. Not everything is only user research, talking to your users. Not everything should be based on that. So you need really a variety of data to inform your information architecture. So you have what your users tell you, but also what the competition is doing. Also, if you have access to some data analytics, because each kind of information in itself is telling a different part of the story. And to have the 360 view of your customer or users, you need all sides of the story. And so that is why I really love mental models, because this is something that can be identified through various channels. So in a nutshell, you can do it through usability testing, card sorting, interviews as well can help, of course, tree testing, of course, as well. You can also identify even mental models doing desk research, so reviewing past research. So that is a really important matter that should be done even before thinking about crafting some, let's say, wireframes or low fidelity prototypes or high fidelity prototype. We should think first about how is information structured, because that would be the basis. And for several reasons, if you start to design something and then the information needs to be restructured, you're doing the work twice and you're going backwards. So some methodologies are, let's say, it's important to do them at some point in the product development lifecycle. And the later you do it, the more costly it will be if you realize you made some mistakes along the way. So mental model mapping for me is one of the processes that should be done really early, because it will avoid you to do back and forth design and corrections and so on. And also because, this is the most basic, let's say, kind of experience. Even if your design is not quote unquote beautiful, if at least your users are able to accomplish the task in a pragmatic sense, it can be in itself a success. So that would be my 2 cents about why mental model mapping is so important and why it should be the basis, and my thought on the fact that it's oftentimes overlooked. We'll talk about then some methodologies you can use to identify mental models, and not necessarily user research oriented, not necessarily talking to your users, but at least thinking about this, at least thinking that this is one step in a product development lifecycle. Okay, I rambled enough, and now I want to cover the idea of this episode, which is mental model mapping. So, to represent the mental model of your users, you need to use, in general, some kind of mental model map. So, I will first present what is, in general, a mental model map, the most commonly used. And here I will use the reference of Indy Young. There was a book written on this topic with a presentation and a description on how to represent mental models. It's not by me. This content is not by me, and it's not my framework. I'm just saying what exists out there. But this is, I would say, probably, if I'm not mistaken, this is the most common type of diagram when we think about mental models. So that will be the first part, the most common one. Then we will move on to other kinds of mental model mapping, and along the way I will also introduce the process for you to build these mental model mappings. So think about a mental model as a series of tasks that your users have to accomplish. So it should be really pragmatic in nature. So it should outline the steps, the considerations, and the processes that your users go through to accomplish a goal. In my opinion, it's not so far from jobs to be done, but jobs to be done is a different framework, although related. A lot of frameworks are related, to be honest. But it's like, what is the task that I have to accomplish? And along the way, what are the steps that I'm taking? What are my considerations? And what are my thoughts? My thought process or my thoughts. Once you have that, you can represent that in a map. And let me be clear before anything else. There are some standards to represent that, at least that have been described in the literature and that work pretty well. And I also like it very much, to be honest, and I'm a user of these frameworks. However, like any type of mapping in general, and so you might be more familiar with mind mapping, like any type of mapping, there is no standard rule, let's say. Mapping is about representing the information that you have about something. So it can be someone, something, a process, whatever. And you represent relationships between parts of let's say, an ecosystem, let's say. And this ecosystem can be anything. It can be an ecosystem of tasks. It can be an ecosystem of products. It can be an ecosystem of competitors. It can be anything. And so the idea is to represent visually these relationships between these constituents, let's say. And this process is a mapping. And so I am an advocate of the ones who would say you don't need to let's say, be rigid about this. You don't need to follow really precisely one way of doing. Just use the one that is the most useful to you. And the idea is just try to represent visually your information and relate pieces one to another. And the idea behind that is just that it would make your visualization of data and of information easier, let's say. And so if you prefer one of the ways that I'm describing now, so be it and use it. But also have in mind that first, I am not the owner of these frameworks. I did not describe any of them. I did not describe any of these visualizations. These are just ideas, so you can complete them and yeah, basically use the one that you prefer. So for the ones that is the most known, let's say, the steps you would take are the following. So you would, of course, first conduct user research or gather data about the behaviors, the thoughts and motivations related to the task or the domain that you're studying. And you would try, when you organize all your data, your thoughts, you would try to focus on understanding the workflows and mental processes. In my opinion, it's a bit difficult if you integrate some ideas about feelings, opportunities, and the like. So for me, I like my mental models to be really pragmatic. What is my end goal? What am I trying to do? What are the steps to achieve that? And if you think about an interface or a product, a digital product, for instance, where am I going to try to achieve this goal? What are the screens I'm looking for? So that would be how I would do it. It's really pragmatic in a sense. It's something that could be gathered by observing someone doing something and hearing their thoughts out loud. What do they try to do and why? Like the answer to this question, that would be that. Because if we are adding more dimensions such as feelings and the like, it becomes almost, in my opinion, but let me know your thoughts, it becomes almost a customer journey, basically. And it's not exactly the same thing. So once you have all your data, you would analyze it. So you would review all your interview transcripts, all your notes, and you would identify the key tasks, the behaviors, and the thought processes. Once you have that, you should break them down into discrete steps. So let's say I want to book a flight, whatever. I will open my laptop, I will connect, enter my password, I will launch my browser, then what will I do? That's the thing. And then also, before I move forward, I want really to emphasize the time scale that you want to have in focus. It's under your control. For instance, if you want to study the whole process of a behavior, imagine to create a new product, maybe you would be interested in the whole sequence from start to finish. But if you're just interested in improving your website, for instance, then you would be only measuring what are the steps from the moment the user lands on the website until they exit the website, for instance. And so you are the one who choose the time scale and the start and the finish line, let's say. But for the sake of the example, so I would open my browser, I would enter some airline company in Google, for instance, but maybe I would prefer Bing for whatever other reason, or I don't know, maybe I would enter directly the URL of the airline. Yeah, some people are like that. I don't know anyone like that, but I think it exists. And I highly respect you if you do that. So that is also indicative of a mental model, basically. So you break down all these into discrete steps or atomic elements, okay? And then you would group similar tasks and behaviors into broader categories or mental spaces. So, for instance, if we want to define how someone would progress for an exam, to study for an exam, and this example from the Interaction Design Foundation, you would have different mental spaces, which would be apply for the test, and when you apply for the test, for instance, the first step could be search web for tests, then you would register, then you would have a confirmation email, and then another mental space could be studying. So you would first define a study plan, and this study plan would have several steps. Then you would define the books you need to read, and this would also have different steps, and so on and so forth. Once you have that, you would just organize all these categories horizontally. And so the one that is the most at the left would be the start of your, let's say, sequence of steps, and the one the most at the right would be the end. And so the idea is that you have these mental spaces, which are kind of buckets of activities and of steps. And inside these buckets, you have towers, which are the discrete, let's say, tasks. For instance, crafting a study plan. This is one task. And then books to read. Define the books to read. This is another task. This belongs to the mental space of studying. Inside each of these towers, because in the mental model that I described earlier, these are towers. And so you would have, for instance, study plan. You would have, let's say, craft an outline and then determine a timeline associated to the study plan. So inside of each task, you would have subsets of actions. So we could call it other names. It could be jobs, and then inside of each job, you have actions, sequence of steps that you do. The idea is the main idea is really to have this level of granularity, because this is the goal of the mental model, is to represent how someone mentally operates when it comes to accomplishing a task. So once you have that, you organize your data horizontally, and you would draw a horizontal line. And so below that, the horizontal line would go below. So above this horizontal line, we have the towers, which represents user behaviors and thoughts. And as I said, you should group the towers under broad category headings. For instance, as I was saying, studying, test day, during the test, and after. And then below the line, you would add potential current or potential design elements that would support each tower. So it could be, for instance, studying, books to read, an app to help people find books to read, for instance, whatever. Practical exercises. It could be PDFs of exercises given by the university, whatever. So you would have either the current experience from your user, what they are currently using, but you can superimpose onto that the opportunities. And so that would be kind of it. So it can be features, content, services, and then the idea, you can analyze this kind of mental model. So first of all, this is a basis for discussion between you and the stakeholders, and so everyone would be aligned inside of the company regarding what is our users' mental models. First of all, what are the actions? What is the flow? But also, what are we providing right now to support their mental model? What are we providing that is aligned with their mental models? And so one way to analyze that is to analyze the size of your towers. If you have a lot of sub-steps, one on top of the other, regarding the tasks your users are accomplishing, but you see below the horizontal line, in terms of current solutions, that you have almost nothing, that it's not matching. Imagine these towers, that the line is like water. It's like the water horizon. And then below the line, you have a reflection. And so if you see that it's not being reflected, like the amount of sub-steps they are taking is not being reflected by the amount of features or support for them to accomplish their mental model, to accomplish their task, then you have a problem. So this would be the way to analyze it. And then where you have some gaps, these represent opportunities. So not everything is negative, of course. In UX research and in UX design, when we have gaps, this is a problem, but it's good to have that because it's a basis for ideating. So that would be the most common, let's say, way to make your mental model. But then, as I said, you also have other kind of maps. In fact, any map, according to Nielsen-Norman group, can be defined as a cognitive map. So, cognitive maps is basically the fact of just representing information alongside a diagram that can be utilized through the UX process to visualize knowledge and surface relationships among concepts. This is the Nielsen-Norman group definition of cognitive mapping. And so any kind of cognitive map is a diagramming technique. And so the goal is really to use, as I was saying, the goal is really to use these mappings to help you visualize knowledge throughout the UX process. And for me, this is really, really useful and important to do that because it helps me to internalize the knowledge I have about a process, and it's also a high level of abstraction. So it's one of the most complex things that I used to do as a UX researcher is trying to map the information, because it takes a bit of mental energy to express the relationship between several things, but in the end, this is something that will give a high ROI. So I really encourage you, anytime you have the opportunity, to map your information. And so it will help you to surface relationships among concepts. So then, as I was saying, this mental model mapping, as I was saying, the most common one is part of a larger group of maps, which are called cognitive mappings. And so a cognitive map would be any visual representation of someone's mental model for a given process or concept. And as I was saying, there is no visual rule, no restriction. Of course, there are standards, but you're not forced to use these standards. So then we have several others formats of cognitive mapping. So, for instance, the loosest one is cognitive map, as the name implies. So the name of the group itself. And so this is something that should be free form. It can be in various formats, so flowcharts, concept diagrams, affinity mapping. Affinity mapping is also a type of cognitive mapping. And so no specific restriction, and it could be used. It's flexible. So the cognitive map is something that should be flexible and that will help you externalize your knowledge, helping you in cognitive processing and to refine how people think about the process and to break down ideas. Then we have other types of formats, of course. We have mind maps, which are the ones that maybe you're the most used to. And so it's more organized, it's more structured, it's more restricted to key structures. So how does that work? You have one central topic, and then you have nodes, and each node will lead. It's like a branch, basically. So it will lead to sub nodes or sub branches, and each branch or node have several children's, but each node have only one parent, let's say. So if you think about my account section in a website, you can have my account, and then it leads to profile, and in profile you have name, phone, address, or you have my account. It leads to preferences, or it leads also to saved, anything. So this is the idea. You can have one central topic, and then it gives ramifications to other subtopics. And so when would you use mind maps? Basically, when you need to organize information that is connected to a single topic that would be like central, let's say. It helps to break down components in a specific web page. So I tend to use that when I want to determine and I want to lay out the information architecture of a web page, basically. And then you would have another type of map that I'm less used to it, but I'm using it every time a bit more, which is called a concept map. So the difference between a concept map and a mind map is that the concept map can have multiple nodes and children. Let's say one node can have multiple children and one children can have multiple parents. So it's really what you think about when you think messy and complex mapping, basically. So you have several topics, you lay them out on a board, whether physical or digital, and then you seek relationships between topics. And so the idea is that the topics in general are nouns. They are nouns and then they are linked to each other by verbs. So for instance, we have a web page that is our services. And then you have membership, my account. Well, you can link our services to membership by the word sales. So our service sells memberships. And then you link membership and my account to with the word paid via, for instance. So you have our services sells membership, which is paid via my account. And so this is the idea, to relate topics to one another through verbs and in any directions whatsoever you can imagine. Bidirectional arrows in one direction only. You can imagine like retroaction, feedback loops, whatever. In neuroscience, for instance, which is an area that I studied a lot, there is a lot of these kind of maps when you want to express the effects of neurotransmitters, for instance, or hormones in the human body. There is always kind of a retroaction. There are always some kind of loops. I'm not a professional in this area, but I remember very well from my studies, and actually this helped me a lot when it comes to then representing the users and their let's say their processes. Imagine a user would continue doing one behavior until some limit is reached. For instance, I would continue to add items to my cart until my cart reaches a certain value. And so then you can imagine a retroactive loop, feedback, let's say not feedback, but you would imagine some kind of impact from the output of one step to the input of the next step. Okay, and so as I was saying, the concept mapping is a map which is used to visualize complex, interconnected concepts, and it helps you to really develop holistic pictures of concepts and relationships. And so it also allows you to represent not only concepts among them, that's why I like it very much, but also what is the action that is necessary to relate those concepts. And this is allowed thanks to the use of verbs. And so I really like this process, although it's more, let's say, tedious to make. It doesn't also have the same goal, basically. I would more use this process when I want to explore relationships among several concepts, and maybe more in an exploratory manner. So first I explore how my users are interacting with my products, basically, and then once I know about this, I would probably use the mind map to organize my web page, for instance, or my digital product accordingly, let's say. So this is the process that I would follow, because you have the cognitive map, as I was saying, which has a high adaptability. It's really loose in terms of organization, in terms of structure. You really do not follow a certain process or framework. You do it as you want, and it has a high adaptability, let's say. So you can imagine flowcharts, affinity diagramming, and so on. Then you have concept mapping, which relates topics to one another through verbs, and it represents, let's say, the user. And then you have the mind map. And so, sorry, the concept map is less adaptable than a cognitive mapping, let's say. And so it's less loose and it's more restricted, let's say. But it's more open and broad than a mind map. A mind map is really just a relationship between concepts, and there is no verb to express these relationships. It's just they're related. We know they're related, and we don't know how, but, well, we might know how, but they're related. So in general, the way they are related encompasses the mind map. So we define, for instance, all these concepts are related by the fact that blah, blah, blah. So, for instance, if you do an information architecture, you would do a mind map. And you know they're all related because they are parent or children inside of a page. So the kind of relationship is always the same. So that's why it's less adaptable, let's say. And so naturally you would move from cognitive to concept to mind map the more you move towards something that is more defined, let's say. And probably the mind map is less user-oriented. It doesn't mean that it's not, but it would be less. In my opinion, it's more. I would find more uses of a mind map for product and for information architecture in terms of UX, let's say. Because if not, I would probably more use concept mapping when it comes to users. But this is highly debatable, to be honest. This is only my perspective, of course, like anything in this podcast. So we reviewed cognitive maps. We described the most common one, which is the one described by Indy Young, which I really love, to be honest. Then we moved on to how you can come up with this mental model, graph or map. And finally, I described some alternative mental model maps. And that is it for today. In the next episode, I will cover some techniques that you can use to come up with a mental model. And spoiler alert, it's not only card sorting and tree testing. And in fact, as I said in my first episode of this series, they are not enough, in my opinion. It's only one piece of the story. So, if you like this episode, please subscribe. If you're not subscribed yet, leave me a review. You can access this show on YouTube and in other platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave me a review. It helps me to improve. Share it with your friends and colleagues. Feel free to reach out to me. You have everything in the show notes. You can leave comments. You can reach out for mentorship sessions, free or not, depending on the setting. And let me know, why not in comments or reaching out directly to me, what topics do you like, would you want me to address in the next episodes? That would be really helpful for me to deliver content that is helpful for you. In the end, it would be a win-win situation. So thanks a lot for listening, and see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining me today on UXChange. I hope you found today's episode insightful and valuable. Make sure to subscribe in order for you not to miss the next episode. Share it if you liked it, and leave a review. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out directly to me. You can find all the details in the show notes. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.